Now, on the same day that Valdo Colocane was sentenced for stabbing 3 people to death last year, both the government and the opposition have announced what they'll do to solve the country's knife crime epidemic. Home Secretary James Cleverly says fresh legislation will be introduced next Thursday to ban zombie-style knives. Meanwhile, Labour's plan includes a £100 million youth programme to help tackle knife crime. Well, I'm joined now in the studio by our political correspondent, Olivia Utley. Olivia, perhaps no coincidence, it's on the same day as Colocane is sentenced, and the big question is, will just simply limiting the supply of knives have any impact at all?
Well, this is the big question. Both the major parties are concentrating their efforts on limiting the supply. The government's measures announced today will basically close a few loopholes in the legislation that they've already created to ban zombie knives. Labour say that it doesn't go far enough. They would want to extend the ban to cover more different types of blades. The government's ban is quite specific on these zombie knives and machetes. And Labour say that it would also go a step further and make it more difficult for people to buy knives online. At the moment, security is often very lax on these websites. You just have to tick a box and say that you're over 18 and a knife will be delivered to your house. Of course, the big question for both parties is surely what will happen then, even if you do manage to completely stamp out these particular kinds of knives. There are other kinds of knife, and banning the sale of knives generally is obviously impossible. There are legitimate reasons why people own kitchen knives, for example. So it's a real uphill battle for both major parties. And I think that Labour will probably fall into many of the same traps as the Conservatives if they get into government later this year. OK,
Olivia Utley, thank you for that summary there. I can now speak with anti-knife crime campaigner Alison Cope, whose son Joshua was murdered in 2013 after being stabbed. Welcome to the show, Alison. Thanks for joining us.
Hello.
Firstly, the case today of Valdo Colocane. You've maybe seen footage of relatives outside the court sharing their very, very obvious pain, and in many senses, their life sentence is beginning. How did this impact your life?
It impacted every single part of my life. Losing a child is hard enough, but if it's through someone else's choice, it's a very difficult thing to move forward from. Most people can't. It traumatises you and it breaks your heart forever. So you just have to try and take one step at a time.
And when you hear the government today, both parties on the same day saying, oh, the way to end this is simply to restrict the supply of knives, what do you say to that?
It's just incredibly frustrating for people like myself and many other people around the country, because just like your colleague said, if you make all knives disappear, zombie knives, machetes, if young people have a mindset to hurt, which some do, they will make their own weapons, they will find something else. You cannot stop young people stabbing other people until you really address the reason. The tragic case today, mental health, so not gangs, not drugs, failings in the mental health system, and that's what we will see in mental health services, youth services, family services. Labour, I think, are going in the right direction, but as your colleague said, they're probably going to come up against some very big hurdles. They've already invested way more than £100 million into community services, and yet we've had many young people murdered since that investment. So I don't think it's going to be enough, and I don't think it's going to be a consistent approach that we're going to see a huge difference.
And Alison, the mother of Grace O'Malley Kumar, who was stabbed to death in Nottingham, said that she would like to see mandatory jail terms for carrying knives. Do you think that may work?
They're already there. They're not used. They're not consistently used. So, you know, it's a life sentence for murder. And if you are caught with a knife, it should be potentially up to 4 years in prison. But we don't have enough probation officers, prison spaces, police to actually implement that, which, you know, but on the flip side, we really want a 14-year-old to be sent to prison for carrying a knife if it was just a one-off. We need to make sure there's an intervention to make sure that they don't ever do that again, which is what Labour are trying to bring in and make sure that it's implemented, that there are strong consequences to carrying a knife. But we must, again, focus on why. If we find out why a young person is carrying a weapon, we have the solution.
OK, Alison Cope, whose son Joshua was sadly murdered in 2013 after being stabbed now, an anti-knife crime campaigner. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your thoughts on what must be a harrowing day looking back over this crime. Must bring back painful memories. Thank you so much for sharing with us.